Hey there, piano friends. If you have been struggling with the bass clef, you are definitely not alone. It's something that so many students struggle with. And so in this video, we're going to finally crack the code so that you're reading the bass clef fluently in a matter of minutes. Because let's be real for a moment, the way most teachers still teach this bass clef concept is through mnemonics. Things like good, boys, do, fine, always, and all cows eat grass. You've probably come across at least one video or a teacher that approached it like this, and that's probably a big reason you're here today, because you realize that just doesn't work. And it's mainly because this isn't actually how we read piano music. As much as teachers still emphasize letters, we actually read music more by contour, which you're going to learn about in this video. And if you're new here, my name is Jonathan, and on this channel we provide practical tutorials to help you improve at the piano faster. Now let's dive in. To start, we're going to not use these mnemonics or even try to memorize the entire bass clef quickly, but instead we're just going to memorize 4 notes really, really well. And they're as follows. And each one has a little trick that'll help you with this. So first we have middle C. That probably goes without saying, is probably the first note you learned in piano. And then below that, we're going to have what many books refer to as bass F. So that's the F right below your middle C. And the trick to help you remembering that is the other name for the bass clef is the F clef. So if you remember that little detail, the clef basically shows you where that F is. It's just going to be that line between the 2 dots. So that's your F line. So we have middle C, bass F. Going further, we have a note here, bass C. Now there isn't really a clever signal here to remind you of that. However, it does have a twin up here. So if you just remember 3 spaces up and 3 spaces down are these 2 C's on either side of the middle C, that will help you remember that bass C note. And then one more, we're going to call this ground G because it's at the very bottom. So we have little tricks that'll help you remember each of these, but your first task is to get really, really good at those 4, C, F, C, and G, that are right here on the keyboard. And a fantastic app to practice this with is the Note Rush app. This is such a helpful tool, and I'll include a link in the description below. It basically allows you to punch in whatever notes you want to practice, and it responds to your instrument, whether it's an acoustic piano or a keyboard, all for about the same price as a deck of flashcards, but way more useful. So we can plug in those 4 landmark notes, and then we just play middle C to calibrate it. And then you just play whatever pops up on the screen. And then if you play a wrong note, it just won't let you advance. And if you're really struggling, then eventually it'll give you some help with some guide notes. And so your first step is to work on memorizing these notes so well backwards and forwards, be able to write them, find them quickly, instantly on your keyboard, because you're going to use these notes as guide notes to find other notes that you're looking for. And for that, I'm going to introduce a secret weapon, both for finding any note in the bass clef and just plain for reading music, and that's intervals. An interval is just a fancy word for the distance between notes on the piano. And it works like this. You might even already be doing this, and we're just putting some terminology to it now. Let's say you have a note that's on a space, followed by a note that's on the very next line going up. So to measure that interval, we would count from the bottom note to the top note, in this case 1, 2. We would call that a second, also known as a step. And so when we're reading notes that are steps apart, like let's say we have space, line, space, line, space, we wouldn't necessarily, and we probably shouldn't, think C, D, E, F, G so much as C, step up, step up, step up, step up. It's so much more natural when we're reading music. We'll stick with steps for now, and then we'll build out from there. And so to connect that to this landmark concept we were talking about before, you have your middle C, bass F, bass C, and ground G. Now, if you have a note that's not one of those, but you have these 4 memorized really well, you can just count up or down and use those as guides. So for example, say you have this note, not a landmark, but if you know this is G, this is just a step up from that, so that would be A. Or say you have this note, again, not a landmark, but it's just a step away from the F. Or if you had this note, again, not a landmark, it's just a step down from the F. Now, this isn't how you'll read bass clef forever. This is sort of a middle step to get you going. Once you get more experience with this, you'll find that you're finding all of these notes on the bass clef so much faster, and then you just won't have to think about it anymore. And we've done it all without any of those cheesy mnemonic devices. But now let's talk about some bigger intervals and how this applies to reading some real music. As we talked about, space, line, that shape is a step also known as seconds. And then you also want to get super familiar with skips, also known as thirds, because again, if we count from bottom to top, space, line, space, 1, 2, 3, we would call that a third. If you can get really good at recognizing steps and skips, seconds and thirds, so many melodies use primarily those intervals, you'll be well on your way to reading fluently. So if we say, see this, we know our bass C landmark, we know that space, 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 that means skips. So easy to read without having to think C, E, G, or all cows eat grass, or anything like that. And then to show you a couple more interval shapes, we have fourths. Those go from space to a line with a line and a space in between, or sometimes I like to think of this as a skip plus a step. So that can go from space to line, or from line to space, like that. And then the next interval is a fifth. That's one of my favorites because it's kind of like the outer parts of a snowman, if you can imagine like a three-balled snowman, but just the outer one. So that's a space to a space with a space in between, or a line to a line with a line in between. So this is just to get you started, but as you're learning more and more music, try to get used to recognizing those intervals really quickly and then adjusting your hand shape to fit those at the piano. I'll show you a quick practical example of this. This is Amber Moon by Kevin Olson, and again, if you're using sort of a traditionally taught bass clef approach, this left hand could seem really tricky, but with the landmark note interval approach, it untangles it, unlocks it really quickly. So say you're approaching this for the first time, you look at this first note, it doesn't really come to you super quick, but you know that this is your bass F there on the line. This is just going to be a skip up from that, and there's your first note. And then from here, we're not going to be thinking letters. Again, we look at line to line, so that's a skip, and then line to space, so that's going to be a step. So skip, step. And then from this note to that note, you could think, all right, that's a fifth. That's your space to space with a line in between. If you have to count the steps, that's okay. Or if you want, you could, again, fall back on your landmarks. You know that second line from the top is F, so this is going to be a step up from that. And then once again, we have a skip followed by a step. And notice there's a pattern here. Again, this is where intervals come in so handy because you'll start seeing all kinds of intervallic patterns in your music. So we have A, skip up, step up, down a fifth, or the whole thing goes down one, skip, step. And so hopefully this has opened your eyes to a new way of reading bass clef, and I'd love to hear any thoughts you have in the comments. And if you found this approach helpful and want to dig in deeper, definitely check out this video. This is our full guide on learning the entire grand staff using this landmark note and interval system. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you there.